All right, let's talk about something you really hope you never have to deal with. But if you do, you'll be glad you know this stuff. We're going to break down why an accident tow costs what it does. You know, that bill that shows up at one of the worst possible moments, and the price just seems like it came out of nowhere? Well, it turns out it's not random at all.
So, just imagine the scene for a second. You're on the side of the road, you're shaken up after a crash, and a tow truck finally arrives. Phew, you're just so relieved that help is there. But in that moment, does it ever cross your mind who's actually setting the price for all this? Is it the driver? Is it his boss? Or is there something else going on?
Well, the answer is that price is actually part of a really regulated system, at least if you're in a major city. And this whole system was basically born out of a time that was way more chaotic. It's all designed to protect drivers exactly when they're feeling most vulnerable.
Yeah, before all these rules were put in place, the scene of a car accident was, frankly, a bit of a Wild West. It wasn't really about helping you, it was about which company could get to you first and get the job, pretty much by any means necessary.
And you can really see the night and day difference right here. Before regulation, you had absolute chaos. Multiple tow trucks would literally race each other to an accident, which just created more danger and massive traffic jams. Drivers had to deal with intimidation and, of course, crazy price gouging. The new system, it completely flipped that. Now, one single allocated truck shows up, the fees are set, they're predictable, and the number one priority is just clearing the road safely and getting traffic moving again.
So how does this whole safer, more orderly system actually work? Well, there are two really key ideas you need to get your head around, especially if you're driving in a big city.
First up, you've got what's called the controlled area. You can just think of this as a special zone, kind of like a bubble over Melbourne and the Mornington Peninsula. If you have a crash inside this bubble, you're automatically covered by this specific set of rules that are all about safety and making sure the price is fair.
And the second piece of the puzzle is the Accident Allocation Scheme, or AAS. Now, this is why you don't get to choose your tow company when you're on the side of the road. It works kind of like a taxi rank at the airport. A central system automatically sends the nearest truck that's next on the roster. And the upside is it guarantees a super fast response. We're talking usually under 30 minutes, and it spreads the work out fairly between all the local tow companies.
Okay, so we know who makes the rules, but how in the world do they actually land on a specific dollar amount? Let's peel back the layers and see where the money from that regulated fee is really going.
And just so you know, the numbers we're about to look at aren't just pulled out of thin air. They come straight from a huge, in-depth review by Victoria's Essential Services Commission. These are the people whose entire job is to figure out what a fair price actually looks like.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. When you look at a tow company's costs for a whole year, a massive 55% of it is just labor, paying the drivers and the office staff. Another huge chunk, 32%, goes to the truck itself. We're talking fuel, maintenance, insurance, and eventually having to replace a very expensive vehicle. Everything else is actually a pretty small slice of the pie.
But here's the thing you have to remember. These trucks aren't just sitting in a yard waiting for a crash to happen. To stay in business, they do a ton of other work, like non-emergency trade towing for mechanics or car dealers. So all those annual costs we just saw have to be split fairly between the regulated accident jobs and all that other work.
Right, so what the commission has to do is figure out a fair split. And based on all their research, they determined that only about 39% of a tow truck's total operating costs should be covered by the regulated accident tows. The other 61%, that's covered by all the other private work they do. So when you take all of that into account, the labor, the truck costs, and that 39% allocation, you crunch all the numbers and you land on this figure. The commission calculated that the real cost to perform one single typical accident tow was about $275.
And this right here is the problem the regulators were facing. At the time they did this big review, the actual regulated fee for that same tow was only $257. So the tow company was actually losing about $18 on every single accident they went to. It just wasn't sustainable, and it's why the fees had to be looked at.
But of course, the story doesn't stop there. The real world is messy, and not every single tow is a simple hook up and go. This is where things can get a little more complicated and a little more expensive.
So one of the most common extra charges you might see is for salvage. Now, this isn't the tow itself. Salvage is all the extra work that has to happen before the car can even be towed. Think about using a winch to pull a car out of a ditch or dragging it up an embankment. That's extra time, extra skill, and sometimes extra equipment.
And we're not talking about some rare one-off thing here. The Commission's report made a point of saying that these salvage charges were becoming more and more common. It was this growing part of the industry that, at the time, had no rules or price caps at all.
And then there's this other huge headache for tow companies that actually ends up costing all of us. What happens when they tow a car and the owner just never shows up to pay the bill and get their car back?
See, they can't just take it to the scrapyard. They have to follow this unbelievably complicated and long legal process, which is what you're looking at here. You don't have to read every single box to get the picture. It's a total bureaucratic nightmare. And the cost of all these unpaid tows and all this wasted time, it gets built back into the fees that everybody else has to pay.
So you've got this situation where tow operators are losing money on standard jobs, you've got these unregulated salvage fees popping up, and you've got the whole problem with abandoned cars. So what do the Commission say we should do to keep things fair for everyone?
Well, they laid out a really clear 5-point plan. First, they said, let's bump up the base fees by 7% to get rid of that $18 shortfall. Next, they wanted to bring salvage work under the rules by creating a regulated hourly rate for it. But to keep everyone honest, they also said operators must provide photo evidence and a detailed invoice for any salvage charges. And to stop this from happening again, they recommended adjusting all the fees every year for inflation and doing another big review of the whole system every 4 years.
And really, when you take a step back and look at the whole thing, this entire complicated structure, the special zones, the dispatching system, the detailed cost reviews, it all comes down to one simple idea. It is all there to protect you, the driver, from being ripped off in that moment right after a crash when you're least able to argue about a fair price.
So I guess it all boils down to this question. To get away from the total chaos and exploitation of the old days, we've had to build this really detailed, bureaucratic, and yeah, sometimes confusing system. But maybe that complexity is just the price we have to pay to get some fairness and safety on the road. What do you think?